My mother sold the apartment my father gave me. She forged my signature to pay for my brother's college. But when I sued her, the judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison and she lost everything. I'm 29 years old. I've been working in graphic design for about 6 years now. And honestly, I need to tell this story. Because what my mother did to me basically destroyed any possibility that we could ever have a normal relationship. And sometimes I still can't believe it actually happened. I guess I should start from the beginning. When my parents got divorced and I was 8 years old, I don't remember much from that time, to be honest. Just flashes of my dad packing his stuff and my mom crying in the kitchen. But what I do remember perfectly is the feeling that somehow it was all my fault. You know, that thing kids do when they don't understand that adults have their own problems. My mom Ruth stayed with me after the divorce. And at first things were okay. I mean, as okay as they can be when your family just exploded. She was like 38 years old at that time, worked in sales at a department store, and basically dedicated herself to being a single mother for a couple of years. I'd see her on weekends when my dad Lawrence would come pick me up, and he'd always ask me how things were at Mom's house, if I needed anything, that kind of stuff. My dad was a good guy, worked in construction and always smelled like wood and cigarettes. And even though we lived in separate houses, I knew he loved me. You know what I mean? Like I could feel it. But then my mom met Walter when I was about 10, and things started to change. Walter was a contractor, had his own remodeling business, and my mom literally went crazy for him overnight. Suddenly everything was Walter this, Walter that, and I went from being the center of her world to being like a piece of furniture that was there but nobody really noticed. They got married when I was 11, and honestly, Walter was a good guy. Like he was never mean to me or anything. But we weren't close either. He was around 45 at that time, quiet, worked all the time, and basically let my mom handle everything about the house and family. When I was 12, my half-brother Benjamin was born, and that's when I officially stopped existing to my mom. Everything revolved around the baby, which I guess is normal. But the thing is, it never revolved back to me. Benjamin cried and Mom would run. Benjamin needed something and Mom was there. Benjamin breathed and Mom would look at him like he was baby Jesus. And I was there, like doing my homework at the kitchen table, making my own dinner because Mom was too busy with the baby, basically raising myself from age 12 on. My dad noticed, I think, because he started calling me more often and inviting me to his place whenever he could. But he worked a lot and had his own life. So it's not like he could be there all the time either. Years went by and I became practically invisible in that house. Benjamin grew up and Mom adored him. Walter worked and came home tired, and I was there in the middle like a ghost. I spent my time locked in my room drawing, which was what I liked to do, dreaming about the day it could get out of there. Mom almost never asked me how I was doing in school, if I had friends, if I needed anything. It was like her job as a mother had ended when Benjamin was born, you know? And the worst part is I tried to understand it, like I'd tell myself she was busy, that Benjamin was little and needed more attention, that I was older now and should be more independent. But deep down it hurt. It hurt a lot. Then came the moment that basically made everything go to shit. Sorry for the language, but there's no other way to describe it. I was 17. It was a Saturday afternoon. And I came home early because something at the art club at school had been canceled. Walter was working, as always, and Benjamin was at a friend's house. I opened the front door and heard weird noises coming from my mom's room, and my first reaction was like, what's going on? Because it sounded like someone was getting hurt or something. I went up the stairs and the bedroom door was slightly open, and what I saw literally left me paralyzed. My mom was there with another man, some guy I'd never seen, and they were, well, you know. I'm not going to give details because it still makes me sick to remember it, but basically my mom was cheating on Walter, in their own house, in their own bed. I stood there like an idiot for what was probably just a few seconds but felt like an eternity, and then my mom saw me. The expression on her face changed from pleasure to panic in a second, and she screamed my name, and I just turned around and ran down the stairs. She came out after me, putting on a robe, yelling, "Wait, Elizabeth, wait!" But I didn't stop. I grabbed my backpack that I'd left by the entrance, left the house, and walked. I had no idea where I was going. I just walked and walked while crying, like I hadn't cried in years, and all I could think about was Walter. Poor Walter, who worked all day to support this family, and my mom was doing this to him. I ended up at my dad's house. I knocked on the door, and when he opened it and saw my face, he got scared. asked me what happened, if anyone had hurt me. And I just broke down. I told him everything, between sobs and snot, and my dad got furious, like I'd never seen him that angry. He told me to stay there, that he was going to fix this. But I begged him not to go do anything yet because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was scared. So we sat in his living room. He made me tea. My dad always made tea when there was a problem, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Elizabeth, your mom is a human being with her own flaws, and sometimes adults do terrible things, but you don't have to carry her mistakes. You can stay here with me if you want." And that's exactly what I did. That same night, I packed my things. My dad came with me for support, and my mom was there trying to explain herself, saying it had been a mistake, that she was confused, that I didn't understand how complicated marriage was. I just looked at her and said, "You know what, Mom? You're right. I don't understand, and I don't want to understand how you can do this to Walter and Benjamin either." And I left. Just like that. My dad talked to Walter afterwards. I don't know exactly what he told him, but in the end, Walter decided to stay with my mom, I guess because of Benjamin, and I basically cut contact with all of them. I kept seeing my dad, obviously, finished high school living with him, and it was the best year and a half of my life up to that point. Seriously. Things got a lot better after that. My dad and I became really close. He supported me when I decided to study graphic design in college, helped me with rent for a small apartment I got to be near campus, and basically became my best friend besides being my dad. He was around 55 at that time, still working in construction, though not as much physically anymore, but more on the administrative side. And he always told me I was his pride, that it had been worth everything that had happened because now I was following my dreams. When I was 21, my dad did something that literally changed my life. He called me one day and said he needed to see me, that it was important, and when I got to his house, he sat me down and explained that he'd bought an apartment in my name. Not just any apartment, but a nice one, in a decent area of the city, 2 bedrooms, that he'd been paying for little by little over the years, specifically to give it to me when I was more stable. I started crying right there. I couldn't believe it. Like my dad working hard all those years to give me something I didn't even know he was planning. But there was a detail. And this detail would become super important later, though at the time I didn't think much of it. My mom's name was on some of the apartment paperwork, because when I was a minor, they legally needed both parents' names for certain things. I don't know exactly how that worked, but it had to do with custody laws or something. My dad told me, "Don't worry, the apartment is yours. I paid for it. It's just that for legal reasons, her name appears there, but when you turn 22, we're going to fix everything, so only your name is on it." And that's how it was supposed to be. Or at least that's how it was supposed to go. The problem is my dad got sick before we could do all the paperwork. Lung cancer, probably from all those years smoking and working construction with who knows what toxic materials. He was 58 when they diagnosed him and gave him like a year to live. Maximum. Those last months were horrible, watching him deteriorate day by day, going from being this strong man I admired to someone who could barely walk without help. I practically lived at the hospital with him, missed work, put my life aside because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else but by his side. My mom showed up at the funeral. Of course. We hadn't talked in years, literal years, since I left her house at 17. And there she was with Walter and Benjamin, who was already like 13. She tried to talk to me, hugged me even though I was stiff as a board, told me how sorry she was about Dad, all those things people say at funerals. I just nodded. I didn't have the energy to deal with her at that moment. I was too busy trying not to completely fall apart. After the burial, she came up again and asked if we could talk sometime, that she wanted to reconnect with me, that a lot of time had passed and she had matured. I gave her my number just to get her to leave me alone, honestly, and I thought she'd never call. I was wrong. About 6 months passed after my dad's death, and I was basically functioning on autopilot, working at my small design agency, trying to process my grief, living in the apartment he'd given me that was now officially mine, according to all the documents my dad's lawyer had helped me process. I'd rented that apartment to a young couple who needed a place. They paid me decent rent that helped me cover expenses, and I lived in a smaller place that I could afford with my salary. Everything was fine. Or as fine as it could be, considering I'd just lost my dad. And then my mom called me. She said she needed to talk to me urgently, that it was about Benjamin, if we could meet for coffee. I didn't want to, honestly, but a part of me, That stupid part that still wanted to believe maybe my mom had changed said yes. We met at a coffee shop near my work. She showed up all dressed up, with that fake smile I knew so well, and after 5 minutes of awkward small talk, she went straight to the point. Benjamin was going to college, she said, and they didn't have enough money for tuition because Walter had been having problems with his business, and she wanted to know if I could help them with some money. Like $15,000. Just like that. This woman who basically ignored me for years, who made me feel invisible in my own home, who cheated on her husband, was asking me for $15,000? I told her mom, I don't have that money. And even if I did, I'm not sure I'd want to give it to you. And she got all dramatic saying, we were family. That Benjamin was my brother. How could I be so selfish? I ended up getting up and leaving without saying anything else because I felt like if I stayed one more minute, I was going to explode. I blocked her number after that, thinking I was done with all this drama. But oh, surprise, things were just getting started. 2 months later, the tenants in my apartment called me, super upset, saying they'd received an eviction notice, that the apartment had been sold and they had 30 days to leave. I thought it was a joke or a mistake. Like, it doesn't make sense. I'm the owner of the apartment. Nobody can sell it without my permission. I called my dad's lawyer, explained the situation, and he said he'd investigate. What we discovered was absolutely devastating. My mom had forged my signature, using the old papers where her name still appeared, and had sold the apartment. The apartment my dad had bought for me with his money, with his effort, with his love. She sold it for about $180,000 and kept all the money. When I found out, I felt like someone had kicked me in the stomach. I couldn't breathe, literally couldn't breathe. I sat on the floor of my living room and cried for hours, not just because of the money or the apartment, but because my own mother had betrayed me in the most horrible way possible. She had taken the only thing my dad left me, the only thing he wanted me to have to be secure in life, and stolen it. Because that's what it was. A robbery, fraud. It doesn't matter that she's my mother. It was a crime. The lawyer told me I needed to confront her, that we needed evidence that she'd acted without my knowledge. So I went to her house. Walter opened the door, looked tired as always, and let me in. My mom was in the living room watching TV, and when she saw me, her face went pale. She knew why I was there. I asked her directly, how could you do this to me? And at first she tried to deny it, saying she didn't know what I was talking about. But when I told her I'd already talked to the lawyer and we had proof, her strategy changed. She started crying, saying she did it for Benjamin, that he needed to go to college, that I didn't understand how hard it had been for them, that Dad would have wanted me to help my brother. I exploded. I yelled at her that Dad gave that apartment to me, that she had no right, that she'd forged my signature, which was a crime, and that she was going to pay for this. Walter was standing there listening to everything, getting more and more confused, and my mom kept crying and saying she was just trying to keep the family together, that I was selfish, that I had my own job and my own life while Benjamin needed help. I told her, you know what, Mom? If you cared so much about Benjamin and his education, you could have asked me for help for real. We could have made a plan, but instead you stole from me. And now you're going to face the consequences. I hired a lawyer who specialized in fraud. We filed the lawsuit formally, and the whole process was a nightmare. My mom hired her own lawyer who tried to argue that since her name was on the original papers, she had the right to sell. But my dad's lawyer had been very careful with all the documentation, and it was clear that the apartment was mine, that I was the sole legal owner at the time of the sale, and that she'd forged my signature. We had handwriting analysis evidence showing that the signature on the sale documents wasn't mine. We had my records showing I'd never authorized the sale. We had everything. The trial lasted about 6 months, and during that time I basically couldn't think about anything else. I went to all the hearings, presented all the documents they asked for, testified when necessary. My mom showed up with Walter and Benjamin, playing the victim, crying in front of the judge, saying she was just a mother trying to help her son. But the facts were there, clear as day. She had committed fraud, forged a signature, sold a property that wasn't hers. When the judge gave his verdict, I was sitting next to my lawyer with my hands sweating and my heart beating so hard, I thought everyone could hear it. The judge said my mother was guilty of fraud and forgery, that she had to return all the money from the apartment sale plus damages, and that due to the severity of the crime, he was sentencing her to 2 years in prison. 2 years. My mom started screaming in court that it wasn't fair, that she was just helping her family, and the officers had to calm her down. Walter looked devastated. Benjamin was crying, and I was just sitting there feeling completely empty. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt like it had all been a massive loss. Yes, I was going to get the money back. Yes, justice had been served. But also my mother was going to prison. Benjamin had lost the money for his college because of my mom's actions, and Walter was destroyed. After it was all over and we left the courthouse, Walter found me outside. He asked if we could talk, and we sat on a bench near the parking lot. I said, "Walter, there's something you need to know." And I told him about that day when I was 17, when I discovered my mom with another man. I told him everything, every detail I'd been keeping for over a decade. Walter didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there looking straight ahead, and then he thanked me for telling him. He said he'd always had his suspicions, but never wanted to believe Ruth was capable of that. And now everything made sense. All the times she'd been distant, all the times there'd been money missing, all the weird behaviors. He told me he was going to file for divorce, that he couldn't go on with this anymore, and that he was so sorry for everything that had happened to me. We hugged right there. 2. People destroyed by the same selfish and manipulative woman. Walter did file for divorce about a month later. My mom was still waiting to enter prison at that point. The whole legal process took time, and apparently when she got the divorce papers, she tried to contact me, left me like 50 voicemails that I never listened to, messages where she blamed me for destroying her family, where she told me I was a horrible daughter, where she alternated between insulting me and begging me to talk to Walter so he'd change his mind. Obviously, I didn't do any of that. Eventually, I recovered the money from the apartment sale. It was about $185,000 after damages and everything. The first thing I did was help Benjamin with some of his college, because at the end of the day, he wasn't to blame for having a horrible mother. I gave him like $20,000 for his first year. He sent me a super emotional message thanking me, saying he knew what our mother had done was wrong, that he'd never asked for any of that, and that he hoped someday we could have a relationship without all the family drama in between. I replied that with time, maybe we could try. With the rest of the money, I bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, completely mine. And every time I walk through that door, I think about my dad and how he would have wanted me to be safe and stable. My mom is serving her sentence now. She's been in for about 8 months. And honestly, I don't know what I'm going to feel when she gets out. Part of me is still angry, furious even. But another part just feels pity. Pity for a woman who ruined everything for money, who lost her daughter, her husband, her freedom, all because she couldn't control her selfishness. The other day, I was organizing some things in my new house and found an old photo from when I was about 6, before the divorce, where we were all together as a family at some park. My mom was holding me and I was laughing, and she was looking at me with what seemed like genuine love. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering at what exact moment everything went to shit. At what moment that woman who looked at me with love became someone capable of stealing from her own daughter. I guess I'll never have a real answer to that question.